Hi, everyone, and welcome to another week of Oh Ship. This week, I've got Nikki Barua joining me. Nikki and I met when we were at Sapient, and she was already a really impressive leader back then, but she's gone on a really great serial entrepreneur journey. She went on to go found a digital transformation company called Beyond Curious. She wrote a book called Beyond Barriers. Yes, I think she has a thing for Beyond, kind of like I have a thing for chameleons. She went on and joined several boards, including Women 2.0, Women in Innovation, and LPAC. And then in 2020, right at the start of a pandemic, like any sensible entrepreneur, went and founded another company called Beyond Barriers, just like her book. So Beyond Barriers actually helps global organizations accelerate women in leadership by democratizing access to all the high performance training, executive coaching that they need to be successful. And Nikki and I have been catching up recently, and she has a really incredible journey that has really kind of represented itself in the ethos and belief system of her companies. And it's all about turning obstacles into opportunities. And that's going to be this week's theme on Oh Ship. We're going to jump into that in a second. You're going to hear all about it from Nikki. And I'm looking forward to taking any kind of questions or suggestions you've got from the audience. So we're watching for that in chat. And with that, welcome to another week of Oh Ship. Nikki, welcome. I'm glad you're here.
So great to be here, Freddie. Thanks for having me.
My pleasure. So, I gave you a little bit of a setup. I didn't want to steal all your thunder in the intro. As I always say, I know you, but our audience doesn't know you like I know you, and I'd be great if you could give them a little bit of a background and insight into why you're here and your incredible journey.
Thanks. Absolutely delighted to do that. I think you already framed the journey for me, which is my journey has been all about turning obstacles into opportunities. I grew up in India, and 20 years ago, when I first came to America, all I had were my big dreams and a suitcase full of unfashionable clothes, and when you come here with nothing, you literally have nothing to lose. So with that, I realized that although I was different and I didn't have the resources, I had tremendous opportunity to create the future that I wanted here. And, I felt like an outsider in the corporate world, but built up my career, even though there was a lot of acclimation and learning those skills and the mindset that I had to do. But after a successful corporate journey, I decided to embark on my entrepreneurial venture. And at first, I faced 300 rejections, failed 11 times consecutively. But after the 12th try, I built up a global multi-million-dollar company, going from a non-native English-speaking country to write a best-selling book, to becoming a professional public speaker, to be featured in Fortune and Forbes. All of those steps along the way taught me one thing over and over again, which is it's all about how you look at obstacles. And when you turn them into a stepping stone for your growth, that's what opens up the next level of success.
I love that. That's so inspiring. For the record, I can barely string three words together, so I would agree. The fact that you're a great public speaker and a writer is really, really incredible. Speaking specifically to Beyond Barriers, I mean, how did you get to that point? What inspired you to set that business up specifically? And I'd love to follow on with kind of, how did that come to be?
Absolutely. So one of the things that became very apparent throughout my journey is that as I scaled up the corporate ladder, and then eventually even in my entrepreneurial career, I often found that I was the only, there were so few women at the table where I was, whether it was as a C-suite advisor, whether it was serving on boards, that there weren't enough women at the top. And it felt a little bit like winning the Olympics because so few women showed up. And it just really got me obsessed with that, intellectually curious to say, why is that? Why are there so few women at the top? And going beyond just the statistics to really understand the issue. And what I discovered was that it's really the mid-career where the biggest drop-off happens. And if women could have the resources, the right kind of coaching, guidance, and really tools and strategies that would help them advance in their careers at the early to mid-career stages, you would grow the pipeline of leadership to the top. And then as I looked at what's available out there, there really wasn't anything that was available at scale, specifically focused on women in the workplace. And there are certainly lots of phenomenal coaches and trainers and learning and development programs, but there are one-off little places. And what I felt that there was a need for was to truly democratize access so every woman in the workplace could find her voice, her power, and her purpose through this. And that's what led to the founding of Beyond Barriers.
What do you think? Why do you think the mid-career drop off out of interest that caught my attention?
Yeah, there's been a tremendous amount of academic research on the subject. In fact, one of the best known studies is done by McKinsey. And essentially the mid-career stage is where women get, first of all, life changes, marriage, motherhood, and so forth. But it's also when you go from individual contributor to a leader. And that's the stage in which you need the most amount of support and guidance. And three things specifically tend to hold women back at the stage. First, not having guidance to know how to navigate those career stages. There's a choice of going down the P&L route, which, as you know, if you want to rise up in senior leadership roles, you've got to have P&L experience. So there's critical points when you go from a subject matter expert and you have an opportunity to take on a leadership role with P&L responsibilities, but you choose not to you didn't have the right guidance, that then pretty much sets you up in a certain path away from the C-suite. Secondly, access to the right professional networks, the right mentors and sponsors who can help you figure out, open doors for you, and knowing how to leverage your relationships. There's this idea that women have a lot of friends and huge social circles, but we don't like to ask for help. We don't like to ask someone for a favor to, recommend us for a role or to open doors for us. So having effective professional networks and having the right kind of next level peers and mentors and sponsors is absolutely essential. So that's the second thing that's missing. And the third is visibility. In order to get those high impact roles that put you on the fast track to the top, you've got to have visibility to be considered. If nobody knows you, and you don't know how to articulate your unique value proposition or have a personal brand that sets you apart, then it doesn't matter how much talent and potential you have. You're just not going to be considered for those roles. So really, if you look at those three things, being able to bring that together by helping women learn the strategies to stand out and differentiate themselves, to have the confidence to raise their hands for those opportunities, to get access to peer networks and mentor networks, and to get the coaching and guidance to know how to navigate their career stages. That's really the thesis that has informed the Beyond Barriers model, exactly addressing the very things that are holding women back at that mid-career stage.
It is of those, is any one of them kind of stand out as more challenging than the other two out of interest?
That's a great question. So what women are often told is, here's what you need to do. What they don't often have access to is how to do it. So the how part of it, it's easy to, listen to inspiring seminars and motivational speakers or read a book and, they tell you get over imposter syndrome or, have a powerful brand, but they don't tell you systematically how to develop those. So what we've focused a lot of effort on is turning something that's vague into a very specific, systematic, step-by-step how-to guide for each of these areas. So there's 150 different challenges we get into that have been known to hold women back. So giving them that how has been very powerful.
This is like that kind of classic, your strategy is only as good as your execution kind of thinking. So,
exactly.
you got to make sure that counts. That's interesting. And then, So you started this business I know you told me it was the beginning of 2020. Had the
Yeah.
pandemic already started, or not yet?
Well, we officially launched February 2020. And just literally a few weeks later, the world shuts down.
Not
So,
laughing at you, by the way. You have to laugh about this kind of stuff as a
oh,
solopreneur at
absolutely,
this
right?
point.
It's an
Yeah,
entrepreneur's dream.
yeah.
But I have to
Yeah.
say, I seem to have perfect timing for recessions and setbacks. But I consider it a blessing. There's no better time to start a business than at the worst time. It is
Yeah.
absolutely proven to be just a gift. It's a blessing. And so even my previous business, I did the same thing, was on the heels of a recession. And it makes you really focus because you can't afford to waste your resources. You are lean in every possible way, but it also gives you somewhat of freedom of experimenting and experimenting fast. And so that's what happened. We launched in February 2020. I think 4 to 6 weeks later, everything shut down. We had a particular thesis for how we were planning to go to market, completely fell apart. And we had to pivot very quickly, but it also gave us a different way of making a difference at a time when the world was in shock and women were disproportionately more affected by the pandemic. And here we were in a position to help. So we offered scholarships. We did tons of free pilots. We launched a podcast, which was not a game plan, but we offer that as a way to reach, inspire, and provide actionable strategies to women worldwide. And all of those things have made us incredibly successful today.
When the pandemic hit for Chameleon Collective, one of the things we were kind of saying to ourselves is like, look, you can go into turtle mode, or you can prepare to fight. And we felt like, look, there's going to be less opportunity out there, just as many, A-grade players fighting for it. Which I'd like to believe we're one of, and that we need to be ready to win that. And you could argue that what you guys were doing is prepping people to win those fights and win those battles at a time where it's ever more important to be ready to win those roles and those promotions and those opportunities. So it didn't think about it through that lens until you said it, but that you guys may have been very uniquely well positioned for that.
Well, if you think of the simplest concept of a successful business, it's simply figuring out how to serve your customers market in a truly valuable way that nobody else is able to. And what challenges offer you, whether it's a recession or a pandemic or other setbacks, is that the pain becomes very, very clear. So it rises the surface. It almost makes it easier for you to align your solutions or your services or products to that, because now it's become clear what kind of needs are so painful and at such a large scale. And I think that's part of what sort of clarifies your customer focus. And if any business can do that, you're bound to be successful.
Yeah. And I also have to ask, I was looking, researching the business more. It looks like you've got a hell of a business partner. Very, very, very impressive. Who I also finally worked out was also your wife.
Yes.
So what's it like to start a business with your significant other? I love my wife more than anyone on earth, by the way, but I'm terrified of doing a business with her in the traditional sense. So I'd be intrigued to hear how that is. No pressure.
Yeah. Well, I have to say, it's been quite a journey, but it also reminds us of, in some ways, feeling like we were put together for a bigger reason.
Yeah.
Interestingly, the original vision of Beyond Bears came about on our honeymoon. We did this exercise where
that's romantic.
Yeah, it was crazy. It's a crazy story. We were in Fiji on an island, and we were talking about our future and our dreams and all of that. So we did an exercise where we both wrote down our dreams separately on 2 different sheets of paper. And then we decided to read them out or swap them and read it. And it was identical. We had a very similar vision of wanting to create global impact and really empower marginalized communities, because we were examples of exactly who we wanted to live. much like me, Monica had come from an immigrant Mexican-American family that had overcome a lot of challenges and had made it on Wall Street and Silicon Valley with some of the best companies, and had been had a very successful career. But there were so few like her. And just similar to my story, we felt like there was a shared sense of purpose, a shared mission, and that became the vision of what led to Beyond Barriers, of saying, how can we do this at scale? The idea wasn't about how can we help one or two people, how can we do this at scale? And that idea that, you know what, Beyond Barriers needs to be like the Peloton of professional development. It needs to be something that brings together communities of women around the world, but provide digital-based, scalable access that makes it possible for anyone with a dream to achieve what they want.
And so when you think about the kind of, this is coaching at scale, again built on a digital platform, perfect for the digital world, can you give an example of one or two things that you guys are doing specifically? And it sounds like, to your point, you're telling them the direction to run in, but you're really making sure that there's the how is there as well.
Right. So one of the things that coaching at scale requires is a framework-based approach. Because if you think about a large company that might have 20,000 or 30,000 women that could benefit from this kind of service, well, if you had to go get coaches individually, they're going to have their own process, their own methodology, their own techniques. And so the results may be inconsistent and often not measurable in the same framework. So what we really focused on was, how do you come up with a very well-defined framework that addresses the most common pain points and challenges that women face, but also the skills and the mindset that they need to develop in order to accelerate to the top. And based on that framework, we identified 25 essential elements that either become barriers or become accelerators. So those 25 elements then led to the content development and the strategy development around that. And so our coaches are actually trained and certified in that methodology. So when they are leading and facilitating, they're leveraging that framework, so there's a consistency in the outcome. The other thing we also recognized was that social learning is extremely powerful when it comes to the transformation for women in the workplace. So organizing them in cohorts that are led by these coaches, guided by this framework methodology, has the deepest impact and the fastest transformation. And as a result, not only do they have a deep sense of belonging and the safe space where they can share and be vulnerable, but they also have the guidance of a coach. They have a peer network that can be lasting forever, and they learn the strategies and the how-tos throughout that process.
Let's shift gears for a second, because I think when you hear about the way you're approaching things, I think understanding your journey as a leader could be really useful to understanding how this kind of plays out. So I have a couple questions in mind, but I want to go back. Let's go back to the beginning a little bit. What was your first leadership role?
The first one that comes to mind was actually in high school, where I became a student body leader and got elected to that role. And what it taught me was the power of helping people believe in something bigger than themselves. So this was a group that had competitive bodies. And so it was really, bringing my group of students together and giving them a vision of something about the future that was so compelling, and a sense of purpose that was bigger than themselves. And that belief and that sense of connection, to me, became so powerful. It also taught me early on that most people are looking for certainty. And the person who is most honest in the room and has the greatest degree of certainty automatically becomes the one that people choose to follow. So it really sort of drove home that importance of, where do you derive your own sense of certainty and conviction from? Because the greater your own beliefs are, that's what inspires and ignites other people.
I love that. There's something innately powerful about, frankly, confidence, right? This projection of confidence that you can put out there, whether that is making other people believe that you have the capability to complete a task or a job as you kind of
Mhm.
move up through the corporate world, or whether that's as a leader and convincing a bunch of other people to follow you. Um,
I don't
so,
know if you
you know,
can convince people as much. I think it's
I
I
agree
feel
with
like
that. I
true
agree with that statement.
confidence.
It's not a
Yeah.
convincing. Yes.
I
Yeah,
feel like
it's
true
innate.
confidence is really emanates from your own beliefs, and
Totally,
the
totally
deeper
agree
your
with
own
that. Yeah.
beliefs are, people
Yeah. Yeah.
are attracted to it.
Yeah, no, good correction. I want to be clear and say
Yeah.
I don't think you can't sell someone into being a leader. If you do, it's a very limited journey. At the end of
Absolutely.
the day, it has to be true confidence, as you said.
Yeah.
Um, so you've had some great successes in your career. You've also navigated some challenges, which again I think is
Mhm.
important to being a great leader. Can you tell me about, and our audience, about any kind of maybe a great moment of triumph that you've had in your career, and maybe how that changed you or what you learned from it?
Absolutely. Well, I've had several challenges and setbacks throughout, whether it was coming here as an immigrant and learning how to survive through very limited resources. But I feel like my life has unfolded in almost 10-year chapters, from the time I came to back in 2008. I lost everything during the market crash, but also lost my partner to suicide at that time. And during that time, it was a very personally traumatic time for me. And it was not only isolating, but it stripped me of all the things that I had maybe relied on, or felt like were the foundation of my life. What it took to rebuild from there was tremendously, important in how it shaped me for the future. Because at that time, when you have absolutely nothing left, especially after you've achieved a lot, on one hand, it was the height of my career, I was doing very well, and then everything is gone overnight. You learn to realize certain things that shape you as a person. First off, um, hope is so important to want to strive for something. And hope comes from believing in something bigger than yourself, and believing that there's something worth striving for. And when you have that, that's what creates that true sense of happiness. But happiness is also a choice that you have to make every day. It can be dependent on external circumstances. So for me, that period was so powerful in shaping the next 10-year span and what happened after that, and making changes in my career, that every stepping stone really reminded me that it's life becomes like a video game almost. You start off in level 1, you have a certain set of skills and strategies and a certain level of confidence, and then you stumble and fall and you face those obstacles, and you can only get past that to level 2 when you overcome them. And the only
Yeah.
way to overcome them is to become bigger than your problems. And then you get to level 2 and your problems just get even bigger. And so you have to have even better strategies. So what I've learned throughout this, whether it was a triumph or a failure, and I've learned more from my failures in that, is that it's how you look at the obstacle and how you set your intention of becoming bigger than it. And
Mhm.
all it takes is becoming bigger than it, because that's what gets you to the next level.
As a lifelong gamer, I can't help but appreciate the gamer reference, and I think there's this concept of leveling makes a lot of
Yeah,
sense. And also, frankly, at least in my personal case, I think when work is fun, like a game, I think you also tend to be more successful at it. Worth noting. So
absolutely.
you talked about this kind of building up to the kind of challenge at the next level and then
Yeah.
overcoming it. And I would
Mhm.
argue that being successful in the corporate world is pretty damn challenging, in business world, in any
Mhm.
environment. I think when you start adding in being a woman, an immigrant, a woman of color, or gay, statistically makes it even more challenging,
Yeah.
whether it's for you or anyone else out there. But I also feel like I'd like to understand in your role as a coach, that there are these systemic kind of challenges that face people, but there are also probably a lot of barriers that people self-impose on
Mhm.
themselves. The mental, emotional, whatever you call it, kind of blocks. I'd be interested to hear obviously you can't give any specific people examples, but if you see any kind of trends there with the types of with people you're coaching, the kind of blocks that they might run into, and how you kind of help them overcome those kind of challenges.
Yeah, that's a great question and very relevant question,
Yeah.
especially given the cultural context that we're in. Look, there are institutionalized and systemic bias that exists that will take time to overcome, right? Because it's an educational and awareness process of recognizing things that are built in. So a simple example might be promotion processes. If there's a certain way of evaluating talent that fundamentally, someone who's a first generation immigrant is just not going to meet up because that's not how what they've been exposed to or they recognize or even aware of, they're going to be held back, right? So there's things like that that will take time to overcome. But what I've repeatedly found is that the biggest barrier is internal. It's the things that we put on ourselves that hold us back. And it really begins, all success in my mind begins with taking 100% accountability for your outcomes. When you shift from being a victim or feeling entitled to taking absolute ownership of anything, good or bad, in your life, is the first step towards that transformation, first step towards achieving your goals, because that allows you to focus on what are the skills that I need to get to the next level? What is the confidence and mindset do I need? Who are the peers I need to learn from? What sorts of things are actually blind spots for me that I'm not aware of? So all of those things, when you start to take 100% accountability, it completely shifts the results you're able to achieve, and frankly helps you navigate through those systemic bias as well, because you don't make it a reason why you're being held back. You look at it as, well, there may be an obstacle, but I'm going to go around it, over it, under it, but I'm going to find a way. And personally, for me, yes, I'm, sort of the poster child of diversity, checking a lot of boxes, but I didn't look at that identity as a reason to hold me back. I actually saw it as an advantage that sets me apart and gives me even more impetus to overcome the barriers, and also the privilege and responsibility of being a role model for so many others that it's important to break through. And you can't let any barriers hold you back. So that's why, just like the company name, it's going beyond barriers, begins with yourself.
I love that you applied that to your own kind of your own journey, because I was going to have to ask if the the kind of the ways that you coached other people, if that also applies to how you think about your own life, because you've clearly knocked through kind of a lot of big challenges out there. So since you brought up Beyond Barriers as a company again, I have to ask. I mentioned this in the opening statement. You've got multiple things now with Beyond. I can't poke fun at you as the guy who sticks chameleon in anything I can possibly try and stick chameleon into. What is it about Beyond that just kind of does it for you?
Yeah, you and I sort of have our brands well in place, don't we? Well, to me, Beyond represents the idea of limitlessness. There's a fundamental belief that has guided me throughout my life, is the idea that we all have limitless potential, that there are limitless opportunities, that there are limitless resources and things that could be available to us. But you have to be able to see that. You have to be curious and humble and hungry to go after it. So that idea of believing in that kind of limitlessness, those big dreams and the willingness to go after it, that's just something that I live by. And so no surprise, every company, everything I do is labeled Beyond, with something beyond. So Beyond Capital coming next.
Yeah. I don't think you're gonna go full like Richard Branson, like Beyond Cola or anything anytime soon. But if you had a Beyond career that was beyond next
Yeah.
from what you're doing now, is there any any other industries that really excite you, or jobs you would have loved to have done?
I defined that very early in my life in terms of the areas where I was most fascinated by. I'm not even sure how it was so clear to me that early on, but I'll share a little story about something that my dad did when I was very young. Is he was this, intellectual that didn't really talk as much. He communicated through pictures and stories. And so he created this collage on the inside of my closet door where he put up pictures of all these incredible women leaders. And in the center of that, he drew a picture of me and wrote my name. And he never said a word about it. He didn't say, that's who I want you to be, or I want you to aspire to be a top leader. But he kept adding pictures to this collage. And I became fascinated by these incredible women from around the world.
Like an early vision board.
It really was. It was an early vision board that my dad created. But I started to read about them, learn about them, become curious about them. But the most fascinating part was I felt like I belonged amongst them because my picture was in the center, surrounded by them. So I felt like, there's nothing that is not achievable because they've done it, but it's also life of service and impact. And so early on, I knew that I wanted to do something in business. I wanted to do something with education because education changes lives. And I wanted to do something in public policy and public service. And two of those I've been active in. The third is public policy, which I'm grateful to serve on the board of LPAC. And it's building from there to a career in public service because policy changes lives for generations. And that's really important in terms of scalable impact.
It's funny if you think about that approach. You've got one part of you that is kind of changing society from the top down, right?
Mm-hmm.
And now you've got this other side where you're kind of changing society by a bottom up approach. Yeah. And you're going to meet in the middle. And if I'm confident if anyone's going to make a big difference out there, it's going to be you. I've got one final question for you today, and not to put you on the spot, but let's say you've got a leader like me. I run a couple businesses out there. I work with, and with a lot of other leaders leading businesses. I think it's one thing to go out there and coach women coming up through the workforce, but is there any advice or guidance you could give me that would help me to be a better leader and continue to encourage diversity and growth within the organizations that I operate?
That's a phenomenal question. I really appreciate you asking that because a world that is inclusive and innovative begins with building bridges and understanding different perspectives. So this is the same advice I give to, powerful global leaders all the time, which is ask questions, get curious about someone else's experience, seek to understand. And through that understanding from all sides is where we can find common ground, because as human beings, we tend to innately fear anything that is different from us, or someone who thinks differently, prays differently, looks differently, right? But yet at the same time, humanity has so much in common that if we simply learn to find that common ground, the world will automatically become more inclusive and therefore more diverse. So for every leader out there, get curious. Don't be afraid to ask the questions. And the more closeness we develop, the better we are able to embrace each other.
I love that. That is, I always love to end a ship on a bright and aspirational, certainly not a thought-provoking ending, and I don't think I could get a better one than that. So that's wonderful. Nikki, it was so good to see you. Looking forward to seeing you again, hopefully in person sometime soon. This world's getting a little more normal. I'm very excited to see how Beyond Barriers continues to evolve. So any sites, podcasts, anything like that you think our audience should know about to help make sure they can stay engaged with you?
Absolutely. Check out I'mBeyondBarriers.com. Our podcast has been doing extremely well. So it's called the Beyond Barriers Podcast, available on all players. But I welcome everyone to even take our quiz. If you go to our site and take the quiz, that'll give you your momentum metric, because we're looking at figuring out how we can inspire change through data and insight. So I'd love to have more people engage and continue to contribute to this global effort.
Awesome. And for those of you watching, thank you again for tuning in every week. Whether you're watching us live or you're following up on us on YouTube, LinkedIn, Twitter, Facebook. I think we're now going on Instagram, so any of the platforms. Best thing you can do to support us is subscribe, give us a like, share it within your feed, spread the good word, and we really appreciate it. Nikki, thank you again for joining us on our shift, and thank you again, everyone, for watching.
Thanks for having me.